Hello, everyone. Welcome to Listen Up, and I'm Al Neely. Today, we have Carlos Moreno, the author of Victory for Greenwood, and activist in the Tulsa area. Greenwood is a subdivision of Tulsa. Is that correct, Carlos?
Yes, it is. It's a neighborhood close to downtown, on the
Okay.
north side of Tulsa.
Okay. Yeah. Last year, when we had an opportunity to talk about Greenwood, it got kind of emotional. We had Sean and we had Shay on. I think Sean was crying. So um, I would like to take this time for you to do some teaching, basically teach us about um, Tulsa, the Tulsa massacre. And one of the things I know is I've known about the massacre. I've known uh, what people considered Black Wall Street and about the
Mhm.
time that it happened. And I really did not know all the facts that took place from the time that there was the riots up to today. So if you can just take time to kind of educate us about the whole process, starting from the actual massacre, because it was something that took place because of what the locals would like to say was because of an encounter with a young Black male and a white woman. But it actually was something that was planned. And because of the prosperity in that particular area, uh, the white landowners wanted that area. Is that correct?
Yeah. So like unpacking even the reasons behind the massacre itself, it is a very long story. And so I'll
Okay.
try to give kind of the Reader's Digest version of
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And then, understanding Oklahoma and understanding Tulsa is also itself a very long story. But I think I think it gets back to this idea where it's very important to understand the history of a place and where you are. Um, because not, we can talk about Black wealth, we can talk about the wealth for people of color, we can talk about how to break those cycles, right? And be able
Right.
to create a better society. But if you don't understand where this place is coming from, then it's going to be really difficult for you to do that, right? So
Yeah.
so I think it's a big reason why I place so much time and energy into history, is because I it's one of those things where you can't move forward if you don't know where you've been, you know. And so I really
Right.
try to understand the past in order to get to the future. But so when we think about the 1921 race massacre, there's a few things we have to understand. We have to understand that this is right after World War One. So that as a
Okay.
country, we're just coming off of this global warfare, right? We also have to understand that in 1917, 1918, there has been a global pandemic in the Spanish flu, which started, by the way, in Arkansas, not Spain. So for it to be so close to Oklahoma is very significant. So you've got global sort of um, politics, global warfare, global pandemic. Is any of this starting to sound familiar
Yeah.
to what we dealt with in 2020 and 2021?
Right.
So history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yeah.
And you have these incidences of very severe violent racism in places like Elaine, Arkansas, in places like Rosewood, Florida, in places like Chicago in 1919, and then Tulsa in 1921. And it comes out of this kind of an identity crisis. Who gets to be American? who gets to prosper in this world that we want to create post World War One, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
the country and the world is sort of like is in a kind of identity crisis, right? So we've just had a world war. What does that mean? Like, who gets to be a part of this global economy? Who gets to be a part of this national economy? So white America starts taking a look at black America and going, we've done things a certain way. These black communities who have come out of Reconstruction, and there were 50, more than 50 all black communities in Indian Territory before statehood in 1907. So these are communities just like Greenwood that are their own kind of black
And
Wall Street, or at least black Main Street, right?
when you say Indian Territory, you're talking about what is now what the Midwest would or oh,
So,
what do you
so
mean?
Indian Territory was what this half of the state was called before it was a state.
Oh, okay. So it's actually
So,
in Oklahoma.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, okay. I had no
Yeah, yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's even a whole other layer on top of this, right? Is this is tribal lands, like a lot of the US, like all of the US, right? Used to be
All of the
tribal
US
land
is
before,
tribal land, right?
right? All of the US is tribal land before, Europeans come over and divide it all up and take it over for themselves, right? So you're still dealing with, even into, not from 1907, which is when Oklahoma becomes a state, to 1921 is just 14 years. So it's not a very long time of this transition between being tribal land and then being the state of Oklahoma, right?
Gotcha.
So you have all these factors at play, and it's a lot to keep in your head at the same time. But that's the sort of the conditions
Okay.
that set
I don't want
this up.
to I don't mean to interrupt you. So when was
Sure.
the oil boom in that area? When did that take place? Was that at the
That's
beginning of
even a whole other thing, right? So
Yeah.
now you've got this tribal land that
Yeah.
wasn't worth very much
Right.
until oil is discovered in 1901.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So now you're 20 years on from and at the time, so World War One, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of demand, new demand for resources, new demand for energy, oil. You've got cars that are coming online that didn't exist, right? The car is a brand new invention at this point. Planes are brand new invention at this point. All of these weapons of war need oil, and the new economy of the US needs oil. Oklahoma was the highest producing state in the entire country
Get out of
up
here.
until
Okay.
up until the mid 1920s.
And then okay.
And Oklahoma provides half of the supply of oil that is used up by World War One.
No
World War
kid.
One is powered by Oklahoma,
Right.
right?
I remember you talking about in the first podcast that we did, you were talking about there's actually one of the people that precipitated the riot uh, has land in their oil baron in that area right there in Greenwood, right?
Right.
Right. And they're still
Yep.
there. Their family is still there. Was that
The
family still there?
building is still there.
Oh, okay.
You
Gotcha. All
can
right.
still drive by the building and
Okay.
see their name on it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
All right. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah, no, and last time
entertain
we
us.
talked about the massacre, right? And we talked about
Yeah.
this idea that yes, there was an encounter between a young black man and a young white woman in this elevator. First of all, they knew each other. Second of all, they were friends, possibly more than friends. We don't know that, but we know they knew each other. And third of all, she never pressed charges against him. So this would have been a non-story because nothing happened. This would have been a non-story, except it was on Memorial Day weekend. It was at a time when the downtown area was going to be other than like parades and parties and celebrations and stuff like that. It's a holiday weekend, so everybody's off work.
Right.
No one's going to be in these office buildings and stores because everything's closed, right?
Yeah.
And it would have been the perfect time and place to set the stage for this kind of attack on Greenwood and blame it on this encounter in
So
the
you think
elevator.
it was planned for a while?
I know it was planned for a while. We have records of planes that were dispatched from Curtis Southwest Airfield north of the downtown area, and we know that these planes were dispatched, 8 of them, from the airfield, and we know how long it takes for these planes to get ready. So it's 8 hours per plane times 8 planes is 64 hours. Even if you have 2 mechanics, that's 32 hours. That's more than a day's worth of time, even if they're working 24/7 around the clock. More than a day's worth of time, except these planes were dispatched from the afternoon where Dick Rowland gets put in jail to the next morning. So less than 24 hours, these planes are dispatched and they're dropping turpentine balls on the neighborhood. And we have two branches of the National Guard that were dispatched by train. And so all of this coordination, the police, so 250 police officers 250 people were deputized to be police officers. You've got people, you've got trains, you've got the National Guard, you've got planes. All this stuff takes a lot of time to coordinate
Yeah.
and plan. You don't just do this from one day to the next. You can't.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
So you said his name is Dick Rowland, right?
Yes.
The young man was Dick Rowland, right?
Yep.
Okay. And you were saying he was in jail. Nothing had taken place. He was just locked up. They hadn't processed anything. And before they started any of the legal proceedings, they started dispatching planes out to the area. Now, what were the planes sent for?
The planes actually, we actually know the name of the guy who supplied the fuel and these turpentine balls. They were like basically like, you can think of like have you ever seen dryer balls? Like it's like cotton, but
Yeah.
it's like kind of dense and they're about tennis ball sized.
Yeah.
So think of that. Now dip it, like soak it in turpentine and put it in a bucket. Put 40, 50 of them in a bucket. That's what these things were.
Okay.
And when people are going through the neighborhood setting fires, when you have planes overhead that are dropping these buckets full of turpentine balls, like they're going to anything they touch that's on fire, they're also going to be on fire, right? So it's a way to accelerate the burning of this neighborhood.
Yeah. So that had to be premeditated, because how you just going to come up with all this, these items to start?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So we know, and I've spoken to at one point I spoke to the grandson of Tate Brady, is one of the KKK members who perpetuated this massacre. I spoke to the grandson of his maid.
Oh, really?
And she basically told her family, of this plan that she heard, because she was, in his house, serving coffee or tea or whatever you serve to the KKK, right? She was his maid, basically, in his mansion, which, by the way, is 3 doors down from where I'm sitting right now.
Is it still there?
It's still there. The mansion is still there.
Okay.
But it was bought by Felix Jones, NFL player Felix Jones. So he owns it.
Was he a running back for the Cowboys? I don't know.
Yeah, for the Cowboys.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
So
Interesting.
there's a little bit of justice there.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, the massacre takes place.
Mhm.
We got into just the different people involved the last time we spoke. So they came back, right? Was it 2000? 24, 25, 26. I mean, not 2000, but 19. When did they come back and start
Yeah,
rebuilding? Because I
right.
don't think people realize that, Carlos, that they came back and they rebuilt. That's the whole idea. That's what your book is kind of based on and what you've been doing up to this point, right?
Yeah,
Trying to
absolutely.
enlighten people on
So,
this. Okay.
right. So in my book, I try to tell the whole history of the neighborhood from
Right.
the very beginnings in Indian territory and that being tribal land and how this neighborhood began into the decades where it's prospering, into the massacre itself, and then what
Yeah.
happened afterwards, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's actually very quick. So in the chapter that I wrote about uh, Lula Williams, she owned a movie theater called Williams Dreamland Theater.
Right.
She actually is the first person to have a chain of movie theaters. Not the
Right.
first woman or the first black woman, like the first person,
Right.
period, to have a chain of movie theaters. She had a theater in Tulsa, but she also had a theater in Okmulgee and one in Muskogee. And so what she does is she takes the profits from those other two theaters and she uses that money to rebuild her theater in Tulsa. So she was actually one of the first business owners to basically say, I'm not giving up, I'm going to rebuild, and they're not going to displace us from this place. That's the other thing. So when we talk about, oh, prove that the massacre was planned, the black community knew this as well. They knew that the white business owners and they knew that the city wanted this black community moved further north, and they were doing everything they can in order to move this community further north, to be away from the downtown area, because the downtown area, which is where all the business was, right, where all the economy was, and they wanted this black community that was sitting in the middle of down, or not in the middle of downtown, but sitting on the eastern part of downtown. They wanted to displace it because they wanted this all of this land and all this uh, economic development. They wanted it all for themselves. But she is defiant and she says, I'm not going to let this happen. I'm going to rebuild in the exact same place that I was in before. And so
Hmm.
she reopened Williams Dreamland Theater in September of 1922. So really just a year and a couple months,
Right.
right? After everything, after she loses everything. But she rebuilt. And so she also rebuilt. So she owned the theater and she owned a building right on the corner of Archer and Greenwood. That her theater is not standing anymore because it was torn down for the highway. But the building that she owned at the corner of Greenwood and Archer is still there, and it's still, you can still see on the top of it says 1922. And I like to think it's kind of a middle finger to the rest of the city.
Yes. So was the community all black at that time?
It's an all black community,
It was.
and
I'm sorry.
it was
We had a buffer
majority.
there.
Oh
So can
yeah,
you repeat that? You had a buffer there
we think of Greenwood as an all black community, but it is actually very diverse.
during the
So
1920s.
yeah, right.
Okay.
It
So
was very diverse. So in the directories, I found Italian families and businesses. I
okay.
found Russian Jewish families and businesses. There were Latino families. There were LGBTQ individuals. That it was
No,
like,
really?
yes, there was, yes.
Okay.
So when we think about Greenwood, I think that one of the ways we can think about it is a place where everyone was welcome, because you do see families from these communities who might have been not welcomed in any other part of Tulsa, but
Yeah.
yet they are welcomed in Greenwood, and not just welcomed in Greenwood, but they open up businesses, and they are part of the community. So I like to think of Greenwood as, here's a place that is open and welcoming. And I think that was really one of the reasons why You could think about, white Tulsa or the rest of Tulsa not accepting that this place should exist.
Gotcha. Yeah.
We don't want to have, they didn't want to have a refuge for people who were, being marginalized.
Right. Yeah. So they came back, they rebuilt, um, and after they rebuilt, well, talk about um, talk about how long did it take for them to rebuild the area, and what does it look like directly after they rebuilt it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so think about, the timeline of Greenwood. So you're looking at 1905 is when it started.
Mm-hmm.
14 years to 1921 is when it was burned. And Greenwood has a life that extends 45 years after 1921. So it's really not it does have its ups and downs like any other place. You got to think about too, so after 1921, stock
Yeah.
market crash in 1929, the Great
Yeah.
Depression. So that obviously had a negative impact,
Mm-hmm.
but the economic height of Greenwood is in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So you have this rise, you have a dip for, the depression and the stock market crash. You have a rise again after the depression into the 1940s.
The
It's
war and the
prosperous again.
oil is
Yeah,
needed, probably. Yeah. So that
right.
was a boom.
And,
Yeah,
and
I'd imagine.
so really, you know, the most businesses and the most wealth and the most people and the most resources that you're going to see in Greenwood is in this 1940s to 1950s period.
Okay.
And then you see a decline again. So Tulsa decides that they want to build a series of highways through the downtown area. And they
Right.
have a choice. Are we going to build these highways in the wealthier white parts of town?
Is
Or are
that
we
the
going to build these?
South Tulsa?
Right.
That's South Tulsa is the
Yeah.
wealthy white. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So they're not gonna build these highways through, wealthy white folks' homes. They're gonna tear down the neighborhood of Greenwood in order to build these highways, right?
Yeah.
So you have in the 1960s and early 1970s this period of, you know, urban removal, right? Not renewal, but removal. And it hits Tulsa really, really hard. So there's a Highway 244 that's built really just right through the middle of this Greenwood neighborhood,
Yeah.
and it
I
just
see a picture of you. Is that you under the underpass
yes,
of that? That's okay. Go
yeah,
ahead. All right.
yeah, standing right where that Williams Dreamland Theater used to be.
Okay.
I picked that spot on purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure you
And
did.
so you could see, right? Like here was
Yeah.
this like amazing movie theater, and all the businesses and activity and life that was around it in this neighborhood that was around it.
Yeah.
And now it's a highway, right? And so, again, we can talk about like, oh, desegregation changed the economy of North Tulsa and people decided to move to a different place. They didn't decide. Their house was torn down for a highway. Like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You can't stay there.
Right. Yeah.
We
Your
talk
property
about,
values
right.
are lower. Your taxes
Hmm.
are not. You're not getting taxes. You're not going to be able to sustain your neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
How
So
were
of
the
course, of
schools?
course, desegregation changes the makeup of the neighborhood. The neighborhood didn't have a choice in the matter.
Right. Hmm.
There
Yeah.
was a high school right there, and it's no longer a high school; it's a parking lot. And so these kinds of things, when a city says we are going to, erase this neighborhood, this community, you can't help but disrupt. So um, Mindy, I'm trying to remember her name. Mindy Thompson Fullilove has a book
Hmm.
called Root Shock. And that really, when I read that book, I was just kind of blew me away, because she's talking about the type of disruption that happens in these. And so, of course, Tulsa is not the only one. It's
Right.
not the only city where this happens. It happens in Detroit and DC and San Jose, where I grew up. They tore down a highway where there was a Hispanic community, Latino community. My dad lived in that neighborhood, and it's no longer a Mexican neighborhood. It's Highway 280.
Yes.
So this happens all over the place. So Mindy Fuller talks about in her book Root Shock. The point of the book is that you're you're taking these neighborhoods and you're destroying them to the point where people don't even know what they want anymore, because they can't even recognize their own neighborhood, because it doesn't look anything like it used to look. You've
Okay.
changed, you've erased this place. And I've talked to people. My friend Deborah Hunter, she's a poet in this area, and she left Greenwood to go to school in the 60s. And when she came back in the 80s, she didn't even recognize the place where she grew up, because it no
Yeah.
longer exists.
I saw her interview on YouTube,
Yeah.
and she talked about what it was like going to the bakery and smelling the fresh bread, um, just growing up and certain familiarity and comfort level. And then she came back and she, it is completely different. If you get a chance, it's on YouTube, right? What is it? What is the title of it?
It's Deborah Hunter, and then the series is called Greenwood Stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. So if everybody gets a chance, you might want to check that out. Okay.
for sure. For sure.
Interesting. Oh boy. I think that happened a lot. You can see that. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was actually surprised. Part of I have a family member who did a lot of his thesis on redlining, and
Hmm.
you could see in Pennsylvania, it was probably Philadelphia is one of the most redlined cities in Pennsylvania, but you could just see over the history of the city how it's changed. Um, you did something that I'm not exactly sure of the term. What is it called? Code? What was it called that you did?
Yeah, it was.
How code is used. Yeah.
Yeah, I volunteered for a number of years for an
Uh-huh.
organization called Code for America.
What is code? What is that?
So, Code for America used to be a series of
Hmm.
volunteer groups that took, volunteer people in the tech industry to improve the delivery of government services, things like whether it's food stamps or other benefits, or improve the way that you're getting information, if you're justice involved, or improve the way that you understand things like housing policies in a city.
Right.
um, a couple of years ago, Code for America got rid of all of their volunteer programs, so that kind of ended that. um, but yeah, I've always been interested in this idea, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, and have had this long, tech career, and today I work for a data analytics company. Um,
Hmm.
but I always been interested in this idea of like, how can you take these technologies um, and and use them for for the public, for public good.
Yeah.
I interviewed Emmett J. McHenry a couple nights ago. We had an event at the Greenwood Cultural Center.
Who's that?
And Emmett McHenry is in my book. I wrote a chapter about his life. He grew up in Greenwood. He graduated Booker T.
Okay.
Washington High School. He went
Okay.
on from Booker T to work for IBM,
Okay.
and he went on from that to be the founder of Network Solutions. So he is the creator of the domain name registration system. If you bought a web domain name in the 1990s, you were buying it from Emmett J. McHenry.
Oh, wow.
Network Solutions had the exclusive contract for domain name registration for the internet, for the entire internet, for almost a decade.
Wow. Okay. So how
And he
does that
lived in Greenwood,
apply?
and
Okay.
so this, and what I talked to him the other night about was, how did the sort of the economics, the way
Hmm.
that Greenwood did business, the way that he was raised in Greenwood with this community. He
Right.
was born in Arkansas. He grew up in Tulsa with his family, with his grandparents. And so, how does growing up in the environment that he grew up in influence the way that he built his technology? Because if you think about domain names, they could be, it could have been this thing where, if you were a business, you would have had to, pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a domain name because they're worth so much,
Right.
and that it would be this private thing. But instead, he created a system that was open, that was available and accessible to everyone, right?
Right.
And that's sort of like keeping with the early values of the internet. All of what the internet technologies are built on top of is this idea that anyone and everyone can contribute to the technology. So whether you're
Right.
talking about telecommunications protocols, or internet technology, or web pages, anyone and everyone has access to all of that type of stuff because it's free and open.
Okay. So you use that. And how did that? Did you use that for research when you were doing the history of Greenwood? So how does it apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started a project where we, at Code for America, we started a
Hmm.
project where where we worked on digitizing the 1910 and 1920 census, and
Wow.
we wanted to combine that with land records that are usually held by the county,
Yeah.
the city and county courts. So
Yeah.
we're matching up census records, federal data, land records, city data, and
Uh-huh.
mapping these things together on a map so you can actually see where was the black community. Not talking about it in these abstract terms or these ivory tower terms, but like, where, like, can I see this on a map? You know, can I
Yeah.
do a search in the census for, someone's grandmother or great aunt, or, someone's grandfather or great grandfather? Can we do a search for individual people and families? Um, can we
Did you
help
find
people? Can we
did you
help people
find like
do a genealogy search? Those kinds of things.
you were able to find that? Were you able to find property values and things like that? Was that information that you were in there, or is that just different?
Values, not yet. Although I would be really
Okay.
interested in finding out if there's any kinds of like, in the land records, if there's
Yeah.
like, yeah, if we can find anything about transactions and stuff like that. I think that would be incredibly interesting. So
Yeah.
we've done all this research, and actually, just this last month, we were so when we did that, it was kind of 19. It was 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And COVID shut everything down, and we couldn't really do a ton of research anymore. And Code for America got rid of their volunteer program, so we weren't doing
All
anything
right.
with Code for America anymore. So everything kind of stopped for a few years. But
Mm-hmm.
just last month, we were able to close a deal where we partnered with the Greenwood Cultural Center, and now they are going to be the. Actually, you're hearing this for the first time, like, you've heard it here first,
Okay.
because I haven't told anybody yet. You're the first person I'm telling.
All
Obviously, my
right.
team here in Tulsa, but you're really the first person I'm telling this to. So we partnered with the Greenwood Cultural Center, and
Okay.
they are going to now be the home for all that research. So, do you
Wow.
remember? Did you see The Watchmen
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
on
yeah,
HBO? Okay, you
yeah.
remember when the lead character, I can't remember her name, but the lead character, she goes in, and she goes to the actual. It's actually called the Greenwood Cultural Center in the series.
Yes.
And she goes there and she goes up to that kiosk, and Henry Louis Gates is like, we're going to tell you all about your family.
Yeah. I remember
Well,
that.
we're going to build that.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. Yeah,
It's
that's
going to
going to
be
be awesome.
awesome. It's going to be really
Yeah.
great. We're super excited. So now
When is it?
all
When is
that
that
research and all
scheduled to
that
be?
data is going to have a home, and so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. When do you think that's going to take place?
It's going to be a process. I think that we are going to be able to kind of build the foundation of it
Yeah. Hmm.
over the next probably 6 months or so.
Okay.
And just continuing our work and our research, just kind of like dusting it all off and making sure it all works, and being able to do a search, and testing it all out, and kind of working with the community and seeing what they want.
Hmm.
So we have a goal that we would like to see something up and running by the time of the Legacy Festival, which happens at the end of May. So there will again be a lot of attention and events and commemoration and things happening around at the end of
How long is
May.
that going to take place? That legacy event, is that a week
So it's
or just
usually
a weekend?
it's usually a multi-day event. Yeah, it's usually kind
Okay.
of like a few days. And it's always around that sort of like end of May, early June timeline.
Okay. It's a good time to come out.
And so yeah, and so you've got Juneteenth also,
Yeah.
and a jazz festival. So Greenwood tries to have its sort of festivals and celebrations and stuff like that around that end of May, June timeline. So we're really excited to see what we can launch at that point. And that's just being able to continue and keep adding layers and layers on top of that.
Interesting. Okay. That sounds really interesting. I think I'm gonna try to come out there. Um, so I read some place where, well, a couple of things have been in the news. One, at the earlier part of this year, is that there have been movement towards, is it reparations or acknowledgement of um, property that may be with the two older ladies. I can't think of their names. Both of them like were 90, almost 100, or both 100, something like that. So that's
Mhm.
one of the things I saw. And then another one I was reading about was um, there's been like a $2 million um, uh, fund or donation for the development in that area.
Yeah. So Mother Randall, Mother Fletcher,
Yeah. Okay.
um, uh, uh, both 109 years old. I think Mother Randall's
Wow.
110. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Jeez, I was
they're
way off.
hanging in there. They are hanging in there. So they would have been young children, right, during the
Yeah.
massacre.
Okay.
Uh, um, and um, and so the city, it really is a long and complicated conversation. The city did acknowledge for the first time, and apologize that the city was involved in this massacre, that the city played a part. The mayor played a part. The police department deputized 250 people to be, police officers. And so when you do that, you're acting on behalf of the city. If you're a deputized police officer, you are acting as a member of, as a agent of the city of Tulsa, right?
Right.
And so the city acknowledged this. They apologized for it, and then what the city did is they created a study called Beyond Apology. So what are we going to do that? So we have apologized. Now what? Right.
Yeah.
And so the city has set up this study, and it was called Beyond Apology. I think it's just. I think if you wanted to check it out, is it beyondapology.org?
Okay.
And you can see the report. beyondapology.org. You can see the report that they did. And so they took kind of really the pulse of the city of what do we really think as a city about this idea of reparations. Do we want reparations? Do we not want reparations? What do we
Right.
think? What are the kinds of things that that people want to see? And what comes out of this report is kind of interesting because people are very divided on the subject of whether or not the city itself is responsible. And so
Hmm.
you can almost talk about maybe taking like that part of the conversation and having it be a separate conversation. Now, when you talk about the issue of does the city have a responsibility to build up this area of town and make it equitable with the rest of the city? Now, many more people would say, yes, we need to do that. We need to improve housing in North Tulsa. We need to improve education in North Tulsa. There
Right.
are there were a grouping of topics of things that were in the study of asking what are your biggest priorities, your highest priorities of saying we need to make sure that in these areas we are going to be equitable with the rest of the city. And it's just a really interesting report that shows, yes, the city is willing to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Direct reparations, that's a different topic, and
Yeah.
we can talk about that, and we can kind of educate people and kind of figure out how they feel about it.
Hmm.
But there are other things that we can be doing that are not reparations, but can we start trying to help level the playing field as a city? And I think a lot of people are really kind of open to that. So, we'll get there. One of the things that surprises me a lot, in a good way, is that when the topic of reparations um, was being discussed in 2001, and there was a court case. They went
Yeah.
all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ended up not hearing the case, so they kind of threw it out. And in fact, like Johnny Cochran was one of the attorneys on that case.
Okay.
Um, um, and this was, 23 years ago. The
Hmm.
even the concept or the idea of reparations or making things equitable was just a non-starter. Like nobody would even engage in that conversation. And the report that the state came out with in 2001, there may have been about 100 or 150 of those copies of those reports printed out, and this was before. This is 2001, so you don't have a whole lot. This is pre-social media, right?
Yeah.
So there's really no way to distribute this report, and hardly anybody ever even read it.
Hmm.
Um, and there wasn't any real popular support around the idea that we should probably help North Tulsa be a better place. And what's sort of been a pleasant surprise is not only is this conversation not going away, but it seems to be gaining even more and more traction as time goes on, which I think
Hmm.
is way different than what you would have seen 20 years ago.
Interesting. Very interesting. Hmm. I I think it's amazing. People don't know. We don't know a lot about our history. I think that's why we're in the situation we are right now with politics, because we don't know a lot about our history. Um,
Yeah.
but that's amazing. I'm not sure. I've actually had family members that have gone to college. Oral Roberts University is out there, right?
It is.
What part of Tulsa is that in? South.
South. Hmm.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Interesting. Um, I don't even know. I've had people tell me they went to school there and they didn't realize all of that stuff had taken place.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
The
wow.
praying hands, the big praying hands statue that's down there.
Yeah, interesting.
People come
Yeah,
from all over the place just to see that.
that statue.
Hmm.
Mm, wow.
Fun fact: Tulsa was the test market for MTV. in 1980.
Really?
And the reason that Tulsa was the test market for not New York, right? Because it started in New York.
Right.
The everything was conceived in New York, and most of those videos were shot early. The early ones were shot in New York, and
Right.
all the VJs and everything. And my whole MTV is a kind of a New York phenomenon. But they test marketed it in Tulsa and not in New York. And the
Why?
reason they test marketed in
Yeah.
Tulsa was because Tulsa had per capita the most cable subscribers in the entire country
Get out of here. Wow.
because of the
What?
televangelists.
Oh.
Because it was the era of of Oral Roberts, of Rama, of Jimmy and Tammy Baker, of all of these televangelists that now were preaching on TV, and in order to see them, you had to be on cable. So you have an entire city where almost every home has cable because of these televangelists. And because there were more per capita, right, as a percentage of the houses, you had more cable subscribers in Tulsa than even in New York. There were neighborhoods of New York who didn't have cable yet,
Interesting.
but here in Tulsa, almost every house had cable,
Wow.
and so
Yeah.
MTV was the perfect place to. So the parents are watching the televangelists, and their kids are watching MTV.
Yeah. I'm sure that went over well.
Right.
I'm
Yeah, exactly.
pretty sure that they're still very conservative out there.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I thank you for coming on and teaching us and enlightening us about what's going on. I think I'm going to try to get out there during that time period, end of May, first part of June. I'll keep in contact with you.
That'd be
So,
great. Yeah,
yeah,
we'd love to
I
have you
will.
out
Yeah.
and test out the technology of what we've come up with.
Yes, that'd be
Neat.
awesome. Okay. Any last words before we anything you want us to know?
So I am going to. We did video the conversation with Emmett McHenry.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah.
And I think what I'd like to do is put that on YouTube.
Yeah.
So that folks can see it. I think more people really need to understand his story.
Yeah.
And just understand, again, the history. Like, we can talk about Bill Gates, we can talk about Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and these guys. But people who look like you and me, Al, we have been erased out of that internet history.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just not a fair depiction of who was behind the scenes in developing all this technology. I think if you really told the truth, you would see a lot more of a diversity of people. You would see men and women, you would see people of color, you would see, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's not just the rich Silicon Valley guys that built Silicon Valley. It was also people like Emmett J. McHenry, who graduated Booker T. Washington High School, grew up in Greenwood, and was a central part of some of these research teams in IBM and a founder of Network Solutions. So he was right in the middle of everything. So much so that he's the one who introduced the internet to Bill Gates.
Wow. Yeah. And these are stories that need to be told.
Right.
Yeah, because I that's one of my things. I get tired of we just gangsters and rappers and no, we're everything. We're everything
we
everybody
are
else is.
inventors of technology as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
The guy who invented the cartridge for the video game was a black man.
Never knew that.
Yeah, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but Google the inventor of the video game cartridge. He's a black man.
Yeah. Wow. We used to work out there, right? Silicon Valley.
I'm from there. Yeah, I grew up there.
Okay.
When I was born, it was a peach orchard.
Wow.
And then it becomes Silicon Valley. So
Interesting. Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, look for that Emmett McHenry video. And
Is he still alive?
Oh yeah, he's like I said, I interviewed him 2 nights ago,
Okay.
and he's still working. He's still inventing, and so very much he's very active in the community, in the technology community. So yeah, look for the video, and you know, I'd love to continue to tell Emmett J. McHenry's story. And then in May we're going to be coming out with the kiosk at the Greenwood Cultural Center, so it'll be really great.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. That's going to end today's recording. Listen up. We'll catch you next time on Listen Up. For anyone watching this channel, I ask that you please like and subscribe for upcoming videos.